Good afternoon, everyone. And today we shall be talking a little bit of Agha Shahid Ali. Agha Shahid Ali as a poet, Agha Shahid Ali as a thinker. And today's talk is a very brief introduction to Agha Shahid Ali as a writer. Now, Agha Shahid Ali is actually from Kashmir, India. Now, the kind of journey he had, Agha Shahid Ali moved from Kashmir and for his career, for his academic pursuit. So he went to abroad, he settled in America, he attended so many universities to take his degrees, PhD, and then he joined in and taught in so many colleges and universities over there. Agha Shahid Ali had a very illustrious career. So, of course, he was from Kashmir. Of course, he was from Asia. But we find Agha Shahid Ali gradually proved himself, established himself as an Asian American. And probably he was more familiar and as a, American poet writing in English. So this kind of identity that Agha Shahid Ali gained in his long career, in his very illustrious career, and as a creative writer, as a creative thinker, that is, of course, a matter of discussion. Now, Agha Shahid Ali was born in 1949, but due to brain cancer, the life was cut short and he passed away at the age of 52 in 2001. So now today, Agha Shahid Ali is a matter of discussion, of course, as a poet, but at the same time, we shouldn't forget at all that he was a very popular teacher. Now, the teacher identity of Agha Shahid Ali in one hand and the poet identity of Agha Shahid Ali on the other, when both are combined together, we find a very mammoth personality that Agha Shahid Ali really had. And it may be a life of 52 years only, but he had some really great contribution to academic field as well as in the creative field. The collections of text poetry that we have today are really matter of awe, matter of reverence. A Walk Through the Yellow Pages is one of his collections. We have the very famous The Half-Inch Himalayas, and I am really will be happy to read out a few poems from that very famous The Half-Inch Himalayas collection of poems by Agha Shahid Ali. We have that other famous collections like A Nostalgist Map of America. We have The Country Without a Post Office, a very popular one, and also Rooms Are Never Finished. So this is how this man started thinking differently. Actually, the kind of upbringing that Agha Shahid Ali had, he had a transnational youth, taking a birth in India, then going to America as a young boy, and his father was also studying PhD, and then he came back to India, took some studies here, then went back to US, and there he settled permanently. So this very trajectory, this very journey is really, to some extent or in different ways, helped him to think, to identify the kind of position that Agha Shahid Ali had. And it really helped him to, gradually develop a kind of a mentality, develop a kind of a thinking process. So what do we find in the poems of Agha Shahid Ali? That he is a very fine artist, a very sensitive artist. And in him, in his poems, we find actually a deep sense of sound. It is of course, very sensitive. He has a very different knack of sounds and the sensibilities of nature and the surroundings. Now, Kazim Ali, another Asian American poet, Kazim Ali, and he has a very nice introduction in a collection of essays on the poetry of Agha Shahid Ali, and the name of that collection is Mad Heart the Brave. So in that collection, Kazim Ali had very good observations on Agha Shahid Ali as a poet. Now, Kazim Ali is saying over there in that introduction that Agha Shahid Ali is always musical. He is always musical, and he's always, experimenting with music. How can it be more musical? The musicality in the words and the vocabulary, that is something in his mind all the time. Now, if it is one part, musicality, on the other hand, Agha Shahid Ali is confessional by nature. We know so many confessional poets are there, and there is a very long tradition of the confessional poets in America. So in the writings of Agha Shahid Ali, once again we find that very confessional nature, the journey, the experiences through which the poet went in different phases of the life are reflected so beautifully. Half Inch Himalaya is actually a collection where that confessional nature can also be found. And at the same time, the very narrative nature. Agha Shahid Ali narrates very perfectly, elaborately, and with that sense of musicality. It seems that we are just flowing over the words, and we are getting into a different phase, a different kind of platform while reading his poems. Now, regarding a very strict pattern in the poems of Agha Shahid Ali, it may seem to us that no, Agha Shahid Ali is not very, a kind of a man, a kind of a poet who is very rough and tough with the structure and the construction and some particular model that has to be maintained in toto. We don't find such kind of, strict patterned instructions while composing a poem. Rather, Agha Shahid Ali is more interested about finding, identifying a kind of a shape, a formlessness, and the sound in the poetry. What is very significant in the poems of Agha Shahid Ali is that when it is formlessness, through formlessness, he would like to find out a new form. The formlessness probably is something that helps, to identify a new structure. Through formlessness, he is always in a kind of a open-eyed observer to identify a new form in poetry. Just like looking at the constellations, just like looking at the sky, starry night at night, So, the different stars over there gradually help us to construct the particular figure of different disjointed, dislocated stars, out of which a new figure is formed, almost like this. When we go through the poems of Agha Shahid Ali, we find that the writer, the author, the poet, the artist is always in a kind of a mission, and the mission is to find out a new meanings out of that dislocated, unstructured structure. So, this alienation, sense of alienation is very, very strong in the poems of Agha Shahid Ali. He always talks about that sense of alienation, and this is very, very concrete in the poems of Agha Shahid Ali. At the same time that we have already mentioned, that sense of transnationality and alienation on the other hand, both are beautifully blended. Now, before I move to some of the poems of Agha Shahid Ali, I will be happy to remark by one of our, critics, Bruce King. And Bruce King probably very beautifully, perfectly tried to pinpoint some of the important features which are basically seen in the poems of Agha Shahid Ali. So, what are those features? I quote Bruce King while referring to some of those words, some of those very significant remarks made on Agha Shahid Ali's writings, that there is a kind of an insecurity. Yes, the more we read the poems of Agha Shahid Ali, we find there is a sense of insecurity and an obsession. So, all the time, this Asian American or later American poet writing in English is always somehow a kind of a sense of insecurity and a sense of obsession that propel him all the time to write new poetry. Those are something, those great forces for almost all his creations. And we find Bruce King is saying obsession with memory, death, history, family ancestors, nostalgia for a past that he never knew, dreams, Hindu ceremonies, friendship, and self-consciousness about being a poet. So look how those nostalgia, family, ancestors, death, memory, history, everything are blended together. And with those experiences, which are so beautifully, so perfectly blended in the psyche of the poet Agha Shahid Ali, those are reflected in some of his brilliant poems. So I am moving to some of those poems from half-inch Himalayas. Now the first poem that I would like to read out here, this one is A Lost Memory of Delhi, one of the poems in half-inch Himalaya. I am not born, it is 1948, and the bus turns onto a road without name. There on his bicycle, my father, he is younger than I. At Okla, where I get off, I pass my parents strolling by the Jamuna River. My mother is the recent bride, her sari a blaze of brocade, silver dust parts her hair. She doesn't see me. The bells of her anklets are distant like the sound of china from tea shops being lit up with lanterns, and the stars are coming out, ringing with tongues of glass. They go into the house, always faded in photographs in the family album, but lit up now. With the well lamp I saw broken in the attic, I want to tell them I am their son, older, much older than they are. I knock, keep knocking, but for them, the night is quiet. This the night of my being. They won't. Hear me, they won't hear my knocking, drowning out the tongues of stars. So, in Lost Memory, the poem we just read out talks a lot about those family albums, the parents, and those early experiences. So perfectly, sensitively, those are portrayed. A reader can immediately get very attached to the kind of narrative that is written over there. A sense of nostalgia, of course. Another poem with which I would like to complete this introductory class on Agha Shahid Ali. The Season of the Plains, another poem from the half-inch Himalayas. In Kashmir, where the year has four clear seasons, my mother spoke of her childhood. In the plains of Lucknow, and of the season in itself, the monsoon, when Krishna's flute is heard on the shores of the Jamuna. She played old records of the Banaras, Thumri singers, Siddheshwari and Rasulan, their voyages longing when the clouds gather for that invisible blue god. Separation can't be born when the rains come. This every lyric says, while children run out into the alleys, soaking their utter summer, messages pass between lovers, Heer and Ranjha and others of legends, their love forbidden. Burned incense all night, waiting for answers. My mother hummed Heer's lament, but never told me if she also burned sticks of jasmine that, dying, kept raising soft necks of ash. I imagined each neck leaning on the humid air. She only said, the monsoons never cross the mountains into Kashmir. So that's all for today. And thank you so much for your patient listening.